That's the type of trash we like.
No, Mr. Wilson. I don't have to take that kind of talk from anyone.
That's right, you don't. How about going outside and trying to kick me around?
I'm not supposed to fight with the guests, Mr. Wilson.
I'm not a guest tonight, you yellow bastard. I happen to be an intruder.
Hello, and welcome to The Good, the Pod, and the Ugly, a film podcast where we pair movies to garner or gather a better understanding of the filmographies of notable directors or actors, typically one artist or creator per season, often with guests. I am your co-host, Ken.
And I'm your other co-host, Thomas.
You may know us from our other podcast, Zapruder Neuter, where we go frame by frame of celebrity sex tapes, no matter if it takes us Tommy Lee lengths to get through them entirely. Our latest episode is the 9th in our breakdown of the infamous Kim Kardashian Ray J tape. They are still talking, but by episode 15, we should get to the other stuff. Thank you for fans of that for joining us.
Yeah, but here on The Good, the Pod, the Ugly, we do a deep dive on the artist or creative person's paired films and their backgrounds, adding our own insights. We started the first 3 seasons with Clint Eastwood, but who are we talking about this season, season 11? And what films are we watching this week, kid?
I believe it's season 12.
Oh.
We're already on 12, although we're doing some
goodness.
timey-wimey stuff because we're doing Christopher Nolan, parallel timelines everywhere you look. He is kind of the second in an unofficial Gen X director trilogy, maybe, because we did Darren Aronofsky last season. We are discussing his latest movie in a temporal pincer movement with his first, Oppenheimer, and following.
And I think this week we're joined by probational co-host Ryan.
Thank you. Thomas, I think we rescheduled our check-in for after this, so I'm going to have to get some pee ready for you. But otherwise, I think I'm ready for it.
Hey, as long as you're not flying off to LA or Las Vegas without checking in with me, we'll be fine. So, season 12, we're doing Christopher Nolan, Daddy Time himself.
Mm-hmm.
He was born in 1970, a good year for people being born, right, Ken?
Yeah, not so good. I was born, but also my twin brother was born. So, you know, the good and the bad.
He has dual citizenship, American and British. He, in 1981, would move back to England, where he spent most of his time. And that's one of the reasons why he and his brother, his public brother, Jonathan, one of them speaks like an American, and one of them speaks like, I don't know, someone that we defeated back in the 1700s. But yeah,
Sir Christopher.
And yeah, who's married to a dame.
Like, I look at my life, the same age. He's knighted. She's a dame. Come on.
Well, I think they had a bit of a leg up.
Yeah, so Nolan's dad was an ad executive, did commercials. I wanted his sons to grow up like him, and so Christopher would end up going to a Catholic prep school, Barrow Hills. He had the advantage of crossing the Atlantic multiple times, so that he'd be on the schoolyard trying to explain Star Wars to his peers who had not seen it yet, because it was released in the US before England. And he attributes some of that to like his ability to start storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
But the cool thing, or the interesting thing, for all of you failures out there, is that he, after college, applied and was turned down by both the National Film and Television School in England and also the Royal College of Art.
Wow.
And so what he would do is he'd end up working as a camera operator for a small video shop in the West End, shooting like promotional materials and other corporate style videos. And that would lead him to have enough money to make a short film, Doodlebug, which if you get the Criterion Collection version of the following, which is available through the Multnomah County Library.
Shout out.
Has a copy of Doodlebug on it. His second film he doesn't show very often because it was shot basically over a weekend, but it would lead to a feature-length film that we're covering today, Following.
Yeah, so I read that Doodlebug, somebody uploaded it to YouTube once, and Nolan's team of lawyers crashed down on it pretty hard. So the only way you can see it is through the Criterion. Is that right? And that's the one where that's the movie where a dude is chasing a bug with his shoe, and then it turns out the bug is a miniature version of himself.
It is. It's very short.
Incredible.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think that for Nolan exactly, except for it does
No.
feel like him later, like a frame within a frame within a frame. It's actually yeah. So you see the guy that he's running around trying to hit the bug he's trying to hit with a shoe, which is the same lead actor that would play the young man in Following,
Okay.
the protagonist of the
So
Following.
you watch Doodlebug.
It's a 3-minute film, and I think like a minute of that is titles. Uh, but yeah, so the very end of it is it's black and white, 16 millimeter, and the very end of it, Jerry Theobald, the actor, has a shoe, but also the insect that he's about to hit has a shoe, and he finally corners it, and it's himself, a smaller version of himself. And so when he hits the smaller version of himself, a giant shoe comes down and also hits him with a little bit of a time delay, and then it's the end. And it feels kind of Monty, like it's not animated, but the forced perspective and cutting of it feels a lot like a Monty Python Terry Gilliam framing of like stop motion.
What you just described is 3 parallel timelines happening at the same time in Doodlebug. Man, that shit
Daddy
was
time.
that was baked in early. Wow.
Yeah. And so, yeah, the second film he said that he doesn't show because it basically all those ideas. I don't think it might be called the break-in. It's something along those lines. Are expounded on and improved with Following 1998. But hey, before we get there, just real quick, as we're at the top of the season, Ryan, are you a completist? Have you seen all of Nolan's films?
I have, except for Doodlebug.
Same.
I actually, and I don't know if I'm excited or not, but it would give me a reason to go there. Aside from Following, which I hadn't seen before, Interstellar and Dunkirk, I have not seen.
Oh,
Really?
interesting.
Oh, that'll be fun. Yeah, I love Nolan. I don't love him like in a romantic way, although he does have very nice hair. But I have enjoyed and followed him since Memento. I mean, Memento, which we'll be covering in the next 2 pairings. Yeah, ever since that, I knew he was a guy. He was one of those guys that was going to be making movies for the next 30 years that people would go see. Yeah, not dissimilar maybe to Darren Aronofsky, who we did last season, where when you watch Pi, you're like, well, this is a guy that's going to be around for a while. And
yeah.
on a different level of public awareness and box office results, though, Aronofsky has proven that out as well. And I guess between the 3 of us, Thomas, I'm going to be the enthusiastic fan this season. Sounds like.
I think that's correct.
I think Ryan's a bit of a fanboy.
My history with Nolan is tortured, maybe, I saw Memento when it debuted in Portland, and it had played at Sundance, but it actually won the Portland Film Festival that year, and weirdly, that was one of the few years that award has actually mattered, because it did really well here, and then it opened at the Fox Tower immediately after the film festival. And that's where I saw it, and it grew to be like a nationwide hit, in part because of how well it did in Portland. And that's rare for us to have that kind of influence. And then, I was a very enthusiastic fan of all of his work, but up until things started to turn with Inception and then Interstellar a little bit, where I find, like a lot of Gen X filmmakers, I find his lack of growth, and I don't think he really challenges cinema the same way the 70s, the boomers did. And he's one of a few directors where that is something I've struggled with as his career has unfolded, which admittedly is just about as much about my expectations of him as it is about whatever he's doing. So that's not necessarily a Christopher Nolan problem. That might be a Ryan Tobias problem.
It could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll save some of the discussion of that for Oppenheimer as we do this temporal pincer movement, working towards what is it, The Dark Knight and Inception on our middle two, or is it The Prestige and The Dark
Yeah,
Knight?
yeah. Dark Knight and Inception. So, Thomas, do you have a list of what these two films, the 70-minute Following and the 3-hour-long Oppenheimer, what they have in common?
Well, they're his shortest and longest films, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's not actually in common, but that's interesting. There's outliers. Both actually were distributed by somebody other than Warner Brothers.
Yeah,
And that's going to be only
two.
these two films.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them have black and white footage.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them have manual typewriters, a hammer somewhere in it, and maybe a surgical glove. I was really trying to wait and see if I could find that in Oppenheimer, but things move really fast in Oppenheimer between images. I think there's probably a woman murdered in Oppenheimer, but that's up to debate. We get two different scenes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely somebody like that in Following.
Yes.
Both have interrogation scenes. Both intercut time, of course. Maybe his two sexiest films. And I would say both have protagonists who, and I have a quote here for later from Nolan, but protagonists who believe they are in more control than they actually are of the situation.
Wow. Well done. Yeah, both feature characters who think of other people as a reflection of themselves rather than other people maybe being terrible. And it's like the downfall of both of them, right?
Yes. I mean, we're not talking Oppenheimer in that, are we? Or are we talking the Robert Downey Jr. character? Oh, okay.
No, I'm talking Oppenheimer.
Interesting. Well, today we're talking Following.
Following, not the Kevin Bacon TV show about the serial killer created by Kevin Williamson, which is terrible. Did you guys ever watch that?
No.
No. That looked terrible from the first ad.
And what season are you on right now, Ken?
I am actually sitting recording this in a Kevin Bacon from that series, A Mask.
You're one of his. He's got a cult, right? That's the thing, is he's a serial killer with a nationwide
cult.
Yeah,
a nationwide cult of other serial killers.
Yeah. I watch trash, Ken. It's no shade, but that just didn't look like my kind of trash. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it got old quick. Anyway, we're talking about Nolan's first
1999. I'm sorry, 1998 entry, because it's the same year as Pi. We didn't do Soldier, but Soldier came out that year. We did do City of Angels and Snake Eyes.
Wow, for the best year in cinema, you guys have been really knocking them out, huh?
That's the type of trash we like.
Amazing. Never change.
You have a little research, Ken?
I did a little. There's not a whole lot. It cost $6,000 or 3,000 pounds. Shot it on 16 millimeter. Shot it on weekends because the entire cast had full-time jobs. They basically got about 15 minutes of footage a weekend on Saturdays. Like I said, it took about a year to film. When he was in the street, Nolan would use a wind-up camera because he didn't want other people in the street crowd to notice that there was a camera filming someone. Shot in 16 millimeter. Nolan did his own cinematography. A lot of it, or all of it, is actually natural light. His uncle, who will also appear in Batman Begins and Dunkirk, plays a police interrogator who I thought was John Hurt at first, but it's not. It's his uncle. His uncle isn't John Hurt.
British brand, John Hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, it was an idea he had in a shorter film, and then it expanded to barely feature length, maybe what cartoons used to be before Pixar. What, 75 minutes long? Not even 90 minutes.
Yeah. One of the things I read was also just financing. They couldn't really afford that much film, and so they would shoot, get it developed, and that was another reason for that slow process.
Yeah, he was paying as he went.
And the budget, I mean, like, if that was the budget, then 2/3 of that must have went probably to film, you know?
Hmm. But as a calling card script, once it got out there with a few festivals, people really, really liked it. I think not dissimilar to what Aronofsky did with Pi. I don't think Following has quite the cachet that Pi has in 2024. It's more of a curiosity piece for Nolan fans,
Yeah,
but definitely got his name out there.
Soderbergh watched it and had commented on Film Threat. It was a website at the time, maybe still is, but he said that he was concerned about the film because it might represent the death knell of cinema, of like independent cinema, because he went to go see it. Everybody had been talking about it. There was some buzz around it. And so what he says is, because I knew before I saw the film that everyone in town had seen it and declined to distribute it, he came out of it after he watched it thinking, well, that's it. If a movie this good can't get released, it's over.
Wow, he would end up getting him the gig for Insomnia, right? A couple
Oh
years
yeah,
later.
yeah. That's through his and Clooney's company, right?
Yeah, and Nolan's impetus for this was he was burgled while living in London, and then he was going over his stuff afterwards, and he was wondering what the burglars were thinking of him as they were going through his stuff, and that was the whole impetus of the idea. And I had somebody break into a vehicle of mine once. They didn't break in. I left the doors unlocked overnight. Stupid. They didn't steal anything, but they took all of my CDs that I had. That was compact discs for you kids back in the 2000s, and they threw them all over my lawn. And
They weren't good enough to steal.
yes, that was what I thought. It kind of hurt my feelings. Like, what
Incredible.
did they think of my music taste that they just threw them on the lawn? They didn't even put them in their pocket, try and sell them for $4 or whatever. Um, and I was more concerned with that than anything else. But yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I guess one of the more disturbing things I've had, it was somebody broke into my car a few years back and just smoked a cigarette. I don't think anything was stolen, but
Ooh,
they
that
put,
is creepy.
yeah.
That is very creepy.
Wow. I live near Powell, so our cars get tossed all the time. We leave our doors unlocked, so they don't break the windows.
Is that real? You
Yeah.
don't?
Yeah.
Huh. So you have nothing in the car. You leave the
No, they
glove
don't
box open.
CDs aren't worth anything, so they don't take the CDs anymore. And yeah, the only other things we have in there are like maps and stuff. Whatever you keep in your
Wow.
glove box.
The
Gloves.
title, insurance,
Oh,
gloves.
yes, we do not keep the title in the car, and I keep the insurance on my phone. In part because this has happened the whole time since we moved here 10 years ago. So
Yeah, as an aside, anybody listening, don't move to Portland. It's like that everywhere.
yeah, it's terrible.
If
I
you
know.
ever see the beginning of Beau is Afraid, they just shot that on the streets of Portland.
Yeah, on location.
Yeah.
It's a documentary.
One of the interesting things is that they didn't have good sound for the movie. And so he would have people record sound outside of the filming process. And he had
Mhm.
said that he would end up using this same technique later when he's shooting on IMAX. Yeah. And he says, like, it's amazing that what you learn as a workaround for an indie film when you're starting off with no budget, you end up using with like your big budget films to make it work.
Wow. And Nolan famously does not believe in dubbing dialogue over for anything misrecorded the first time. And I know that he's had a lot of complaints about his
Really?
films. And yeah, he says whatever the voices are when they record it, he just feels that that's more natural and realistic. And sometimes you can't hear everything everybody says. So he doesn't do, was it called ADR? Stuff
Yeah,
they do after the fact? Doesn't do that.
that is fascinating because there is actually an ADR scene in Oppenheimer with Robert Downey Jr. and Cillian Murphy, and yeah, it's the dubbing was very noticeable. I don't normally notice or care about such things, so it was weird that I noticed, but it makes sense if he's not used to doing that, and for some reason it is a pivotal dialogue scene, so
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense that he would have to do it for this particular scene, but it did stick out like a sore thumb
Yeah.
to me. So that's fascinating.
So is this the first or second time for you all watching Following? Ryan?
It felt like the first, but Letterbox said it was the second, and I believe Letterbox. And that's interesting, because I have a very, I remember movies pretty clearly that I saw when I was 5 and 6. Um, and so it's a little telling that I didn't really remember seeing this one before.
Yeah, I saw it once before, like, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, I think. I think I may have rented it from Netflix when they still did DVDs. It came out, 2012 is when they released it?
Yeah, that sounds right.
And didn't really remember much of it until I rewatched it last night for this. Thomas?
Well, I'm not on Letterbox, so I'm going to go with my first response or thought, which is it's my first time.
Okay. And then watching it in conjunction with Oppenheimer, for me anyway, was very illuminating to see his parallel timeline. I don't want to call it shtick, but just the way his mind works and how he constructs stories is there so early. I find
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons he said that he did it for Following is that he really wrote that script. Well, I guess two parts. He wrote it out linearly and then went back and changed things to make it work. But he also he realized that he wouldn't have to have as much coverage and he could edit around if he does it in a broken timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And the characters, the audience is more forgiving of performances as well, potentially.
That's fascinating.
So there was a technical, like a limitation, limitation of resources that did lead him down that path. More in addition to, he said that he had seen a film recently that he was heavily influenced by. Cover your ears, Kenneth, because it's Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, a lot of people say Reservoir Dogs may have been influenced by a Hong Kong movie called City on Fire. So,
Yes. City on Fire, not as good, but that's maybe a conversation for another day.
no, I mean, I talk shit about Tarantino, but it's mostly later Tarantino. I like young Tarantino.
Yeah.
Till Inglourious Bastards. Fun guy. Interestingly, Nolan has been around about as long as Tarantino, but it seems like he's always working on a movie. And other than we'll talk about in the Oppenheimer episode, the PR whirlwind that he did for Oscar season. He's always just been relatively private and always seems to be working on something. And he's just a working filmmaker, whereas Tarantino, the further he got in his filmography, he's really concerned about legacy. Like, who the fuck cares about legacy? Once you're dead, nobody cares. And I think it's an interesting parallel between the two of them. How Nolan kind of keeps refining his storytelling style, and he started, like Tarantino, with some timey-wimey stuff like Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs. We have Memento in this movie Following. Not dissimilar in a lot of ways, the way they cut and paste their stories to make an effective narrative. It's interesting how far Tarantino's gone up his own butthole, whereas Nolan, I think Nolan is just like
whoa.
he just gets more ambitious with the scope of the story he's telling.
Ken,
Okay.
I would like you not.
Right.
So this listener, oftentimes Ken will go on these rants, and then he will force Jack, or now he will just go in and edit himself out. That was actually a short screed. Typically, like Ryan and I just look at our clocks and go take a little break and come back, and he's usually still talking either about Tarantino or
I feel
another director, Joel Schumacher, or there's a number of other individuals that I try not to mention on mic because it's a trigger. It's like you pull the string, you pull the cord, and then Ken just goes off
Uh,
for
I
like
feel
10
like
minutes.
I'm like the dummy in Magic.
yes. I
Hey,
think
that Tarantino guy, what's wrong with him?
I feel like now you're sealing, like, now we kind of have to do Tarantino next because he's my favorite, and we're gonna go into do some Nolan, and there's gonna be some friction, and then so now we're just gonna have to reverse it so I can bash Nolan and you can bash Tarantino the way. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
We'll see.
I
We'll
do.
see.
I hear what you're cooking. I smell what you're cooking. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Well, let's table that for now. But we're talking about our following.
Yeah, season 12. We're talking about Christopher Nolan. I think my dog might
I'm
quit
paused.
barking here in a moment.
Yeah, your dog is triggered every time I start talking about Tarantino.
Is that because? No, I'm not going to say that on.
Ryan, you did say on our group text thread that Old Man Rant Ken is one of your favorite Kens. So I'm really doing it for you.
No, I love it. I love the rants. I like to wind up.
Yeah. I like
Mhm.
young Barbie rant, and I like old man Ken rant. It's great.
Okay.
I got them both. The following. There's no just following.
Yes.
Here's a plot synopsis.
Oh,
Maybe 60
yeah.
seconds. I don't know, but we'll at least get to. We'll move this thing along.
This may be the shortest episode of the season, which is fine.
Especially when you cut out the Tarantino rant, or at least the back half of it.
I'm going to probably record an additional Tarantino rant to pop in at the end of the episode.
Then we have to do him next. I'm just
to
saying.
pad it. All right, go ahead, Thomas.
All right. Shot in black and white on 16 millimeter, released in 1998. It is not about a young mathematician named Max who learns the name of God and drills a hole in his head, but is instead about a frustrated young writer who hammer murders two people after getting a shave and a haircut. How's this bit? Aronofsky continues to bleed into this season's first entry with a young writer, character names like Mother? Okay, so anyway, the young man has a habit of following people, as revealed in voiceover over montage, as he speaks to a person in an office whose identity we don't know. This non-sexual habit of following people leads him and the viewer to join a house burglar and breaking and entering along three different timelines. One, where young man is scruffy like a British knockoff of same era Matthew Lillard from Hackers and Scream and Scooby-Doo. One, clean shaven and more confident in a suit, which he adopts during timeline where he adopts after he's in timeline one, possibly being recognized by someone whose house he burgled. And then finally, third timeline, same look, but he has a split lip and a black eye to indicate that it's, a later period of time. In a film noir plot, young man meets the blonde. She's, as the label says, and she convinces him to steal something back that, twist, isn't something that she says that it is or actually needs. But bigger twist and spoiler, she herself is being set up by Cobb the burglar, who wants someone to take the fall for him for a murder which the young man tells the police about. The police have no record of a murder or a recent break-in because Cobb has spun a Nolan-esque web of convolution around him. According to Nolan in the commentary, if the acting were on par, the game recognizes game as the young man and the reality of everything that's happening. The young man understands what's going on and appreciates Cobb's intrigue as the viewer watches Cobb disappear into a grainy crowd. I think I got it.
That was great. By grainy, he doesn't mean they're going into a silo full of grain. It's the 16 millimeter grain that you're referring to.
Yeah, kind of a long shot.
And much like we will discuss with Oppenheimer, how cleanly Nolan differentiates the three timelines so early just based on visual cues, because it can get complicated theoretically from a script point of view. But once you see it, it makes total sense. I never felt lost within either timeline.
I had to go back and watch again to understand, and I still don't, parts of it, like the motivation, because if we use the designation, I guess, shaggy writer, clean cut writer, and bruised writer. Bruised writer, bruised young man, calls Cobb to ask about protection. Not a prophylactic, but like a weapon. And Cobb lists a couple different things, including like nunchucks, a chain.
It was the 90s. Come on.
A hammer, other tools. He's like, wait, tell me about the hammer. And he's like, well, you get a hammer, you got a nice grip on it. You can use it to pry doors open. You can, bash people's heads in with it. And so I guess I don't, is Cobb just like improvising throughout? And so that he's like, oh, okay, now the young man has a hammer. I'm going to go hammer murder the person I'm supposed to kill. And that will set everything up. Or like, how did he get? Yeah, it seems like he wants this guy to murder people in a particular way, so that he can go murder the person and frame him.
So, is your question: did Cobb lead him to the hammer because that was always the plan, or is this something Cobb knew he was going to kill somebody, and then when the hammer thing came up when he asked for protection,
it's fortuitous, and yeah, like
so
I don't know.
You're thinking of what happened off screen.
Well, what happened between cuts, basically? Because what's cool about the Criterion Collection and is not helpful is that you can watch it in chronological order. They did a different edit of the film.
Wow.
And it I think it shows a lot more of the gaps in the threads. Or like, so it doesn't look as much of a cohesive pattern. Instead, it shows some of the holes that are covered by the editing.
It's like when they stitched together Godfather 1 and Godfather 2 and did it chronological for TV.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the mastery of obviously Godfather 2 is the timey-wimey stuff. And it just doesn't work if you take it apart and put it in chronological order. That's part of the fun of this movie, and then possibly the next movie we're talking about, Oppenheimer, is the way it's stitched together. And really, the plot, the noir twist at the end, it's kind of dumb. I've seen a lot of noirs and a lot of neo-noirs, and it's kind of dumb. But as a curio and an introduction to Nolan's scrappy narrative ideas, I think it's pretty great.
Yeah, I think it's pretty impressive. I think I'm on board with. I got a book, Christopher Nolan, A Critical Study of the Films by Darren Mooney, and he says that the cross-cutting climax takes place within a framing device rather than between the three competing narratives. And what that means is that it's almost like things happen as an afterthought, and it restarts multiple times, the ending, instead of feeling like a big conclusion like some of his later films will.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's on point, yeah.
It just seems like, yeah, that's what happens. Like, it's not bad. It's just he does it better, very like immediately afterwards and throughout, instead of trying to top himself with another ending and another ending.
Yeah, exactly. That's well put. Definitely a fertile ground of ideas. And Nolan did not go to film school. He got a English degree, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
He's largely self-taught.
He really comes from, and this is the interesting part, I think, of this whole season, is how much of a writer Nolan is, and narratively how he comes to movies and then later blockbuster movies from a completely different point of view than most modern screenwriters do. And that's for him to be the most powerful person in Hollywood right now. I think that's great for movies because there's no save the cat type stuff in his scripts. There are some things in his scripts that are baffling, but I never feel like they come from a place where it's like, oh well, my screenwriting software says I need a plot point here, so I guess he'll get in a car crash. I never feel that from his, and particularly The Dark Knight Rises, which I think is one of his most ambitious narrative films that may not be successful, but I just think he's so interesting. If you think of every blockbuster director the last 25 years of how they pretty much stick to the screenwriting format that rules much of Hollywood, and how Nolan comes at it from a different point of view.
I agree with you 100%, Ken, but he does, at this point, I mean, there is definitely a formula that he's working with, right? It is totally unique to him, but there is like a machination,
Yeah, I mean, like, I particularly Interstellar and this next movie we're talking, and Dunkirk and Oppenheimer. I mean, it's like a real refinement of these storytelling
Yeah,
ideas that he's been working with
yeah.
from following on. And I just love that mode because, like Stanley Kubrick, one of the people he admires the most, along with Ridley Scott, whatever, he's not perfect. Um,
Hey, wow.
Ken,
I
you
think
got to
he,
edit. Ken, you got to edit that 12-minute screed out. You could keep the Tarantino one in, but you got to take the other one out, one or the other.
okay.
ironically, Ken, I think he's turned out to be much more of a Ridley than a Stanley.
Well, what I wanted, yes, I would agree with that. Kubrick also came along at a time where he could do more creatively for a commercial market that no longer exists in film, and we'll talk about that a little bit in Oppenheimer. But Kubrick always used to say that film is a combination of the three major arts, and editing process is the only thing that separates it and makes it its own art. And the fidelity most modern films have to a very structured, rigid script is one thing I really admire about Nolan, because he does not come at
Yeah.
it from that script point of view. He comes at it like, these are the things we could do with cross-cutting and parallel timelines. And he's really inquisitive about the best way to make the emotional impact by using the thing in movies that a lot of directors don't use, which is, these parallel timelines, and cutting it so it narratively makes sense, even if it's 3 or 4 different timelines happening.
Yeah, I think that's very on point, Ken. And I think one thing that I really like about Nolan, when early on in cinema, its ability to compact and elongate time was considered one of the magic tricks,
Mm-hmm.
that cinema was capable of. And to your point, there are very, very few directors. As we get further, as cinema gets older, there are very few directors who focus on that. And for Nolan
Mm-hmm.
to be so specifically and obsessively focused with it makes him a really formal innovator. In addition to a story, his stories are being presented in a new way, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so closely tied to the formal presentation. It's really an impressive combo.
Yeah. Thomas, you got 2 cents on that?
No, I was daydreaming again, guys. I'm sorry. No, I think he's. I'm just thinking about other. I mean, we just finished up Darren Aronofsky, who writes and directs most of the films that he shot, along with Ari. And I'm not sure who his influences are, but Nolan said that two of his early influences would be Raymond Chandler, especially like for the early Nolan career. Like the thing that he realized about Chandler was that you are when you're reading a Chandler story, unlike like an Agatha Christie story, he's very upfront about the kinds of switchbacks and double crosses. The whole point is you're being
Mm-hmm.
lied to, is what Nolan says.
Yeah.
Chandler was thinking about the actual linear experience that's driving everything. It's not the plot, it's the point of view of the
Mm-hmm.
story. And so I think that that's part of the trick that Nolan continues to exploit, which is there's something fascinating as a viewer of a film to try and understand what the mystery is or how all these pieces are going to fit together.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're successful at putting them all together, it's a rewarding experience. And then sometimes you get Beau was afraid.
Mm-hmm.
One that's a good
Thank you.
jab there, Thomas. To build on that, and something that another podcast that covered the Nolan movies said, and the only thing that I would take from that and might follow through with what we do is that a point of praise and also maybe a point of criticism of Nolan is that you could argue the reason why his movies are so commercially effective is because they are presented in such a way as to be a riddle that's just difficult enough to challenge the audience a little bit in solving, but make the audience walk away feeling so smart for having solved it. Like what's really going on in Memento or Inception isn't all that complicated if I just sat down and explained it to you in a couple sentences. But watching the movies, when it gets to the end and you're like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. He leaves the audience feeling smarter than when they walked in. And that is a great boost to the audience's ego. And I think really it's one reason why he's so widely respected.
I think it's a gift as a storyteller. And going back to Chandler, he's one of my favorite writers as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
he didn't write mysteries, like you said, Thomas, in the Agatha Christie mold, where it's like a fair play mystery. He's a guy in the middle of a bunch of puzzle pieces, and they really don't come together until the end. And sometimes in Chandler, they don't even really come together at the end. It's just like really tenuous. But the joy in it is seeing all the different pieces and having Marlowe, the protagonist, walk through them. And you kind of figure it out the same time he does. There's never any hints or clues.
Yeah.
Like a locked door mystery.
That's a great way of saying the same thing. Yeah.
And then the second writer is Jorge Borges. And you can see that with all the time-winey stuff and like the I guess a concept of that goes behind a film.
Huh.
Yeah. And that's like, as we get further into the movies, and particularly with something like Tenet, I believe that, like Borges, and I didn't realize that he liked Borges, but that does make sense. Tenet, it's like the text of the film being a genre, like almost a spy picture, is so at odds with the subtext, which is he really is trying to get you to like focus on. And Borges was like that too, where it's like, oh, this is a standard story about a prisoner who's about to get executed, and you've seen this before, but wait here, now at the end, we're going to do something totally different that you haven't seen before. And that's what I really want you to pay attention to. That I can see that.
Do you think of it as trickery, where like Nolan is just like, I'm going to trick people into thinking that they are smart? Or that's just the way his mind puts stories together to make them come out the most effective?
So when I say trickery, in this context, I mean, I think of all of movie making as trickery, right? Like you're tricking people into getting invested in characters who maybe they would never want to talk to in real life or are capable of awful things. And so that's what I mean is just like the narrative. And as we'll get to when we get to it, I mean, as far as this part of his storytelling, I think the prestige is always what he explains in that movie is the heart of every one of his setups is like there you go through that 3-stage magic trick process. So
and I'm going to spoil things by saying The Prestige is still my favorite Christopher Nolan movie.
I think it's up there for it's number 1 or number 2 depending on the day for me.
Well, I mean, Through the Following, or not the following, just Following, is a great introduction to the whole Nolan season because it's a fairly slight movie, but it's really instructive. And this has been a great entryway to talk about Nolan overall.
Yeah. And did you notice when they go to rob the young man's? So there's a great moment in the film where Rob and the young man go to rob a house, which is the young man's house, because he wants to hear what Cobb would think of him. And there's a Batman sticker on his door.
Yeah.
I definitely noticed that.
Yeah, that was interesting. A couple things that I noticed about Following that are kind of outside of the movie. One is I don't at all know anything about how Christopher Nolan generated the ideas, but the way the two leads are dressed and the way they meet and interact reminded me. The main character, the writer, felt like Jonathan Nolan, who is a little bit more writerly in his approach, and the other one felt like a Chris and sort of a Jonathan becoming more of a Christopher Nolan over the course of the movie and how they approach storytelling and stuff. That just seemed like an interesting thing that might be happening. Following is fine. It's like a better than a student movie, and you can definitely see why Memento is so much better in my opinion, but you can see that everything is in place, as you guys are saying, for like the trajectory of his career. It's not as well assembled as something like Pi, but he has a lot further to grow than I think Aronofsky did from Pi. it's really smart, and I think says a lot about Nolan and his, Emma's business strategies, that
Mm-hmm.
they retained the rights to this picture, sold it to Criterion.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the amount of fanboys who've bought this over the years from Criterion paying like $35 a pop, he probably recorded a nice little totally independent stream of money from something that really could have had zero revenue potential over the years.
Yeah, we may talk about a little bit of the revenue from his next movie that
Yeah,
he has gotten so far,
yeah,
which is insane.
he's very. That's one of the ways he can be so powerful. I think Ken is he genuinely. I think they're wealthy enough that it's like they don't really need Hollywood to play ball with them if they don't want to. You know.
Yeah, yeah. And I before I forget, I always go to the movie trivia page for IMDb, and nerds, whoever did this, they went and every time Christopher Nolan or Emma Thomas, his wife, is named, they either put Dame or Sir in front of them. So someone went and edited and added Sir to every time Christopher Nolan's name is mentioned in the IMDb trivia for following.
And so what Ken's asking you to do right now, Ryan, is go ahead and say sir and dame and just a nice clean take so we can go back and edit that in.
Uh-huh.
Only if Ken will start referring to him as Sir Ridley, as is proper.
I call him Sir Idley. Just combine the two. So according to IMDb trivia, the narrative jumps 31 times between the three timelines in a 70-minute movie. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, just talking about the financial parts of the Nolan Thomas career, their arcs together. They Emma Thomas got a job in LA working for the same distribution company or the marketing company that she was working for in England, and they made the jump because they were editing following, and there was no real way of there's no real circuits in England at the time to distribute it through. And this is the era where Nolan's going to the theater and he's able to see Clerks, he's able to see El Mariachi. He's like, if we can get to America, that's going to be great. And so he, having dual citizenship, emigrates with her. He's editing it. And while he's doing that, he makes the smart decision to also start working on the next film we're going to be covering the next chapter, Memento, so that he has a script by the time he's putting that into festivals. And he says it's like he likes to work on one project at a time. He said it was terrible for him, but that was the decision that he made so that he would have something, and it turned out quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple things about that, Thomas. Following played Slam Dance, and Slam Dance, while still a thing, is nowhere near as popular anymore as Sundance was, but it's really for first-time filmmakers. And I listened to a separate podcast with the woman who co-founded Slam Dance, and she talks about meeting Nolan, how he was already very professional and polished and was actively, like, unlike a lot of other filmmakers who were kind of just thrilled that they made it to Sundance, to the city, if not the actual festival. Nolan had the pitch for Memento and was actively, Soderbergh was at the early Slam Dances. He was actively talking to people, bracing people and being like, I have my next movie, like, let's do it. And that is so, and he was already doing The Suit. So he really struck, and he had the British accent, of course. So he really made an impression and the most of that initial Slam Dance. And then something else that I just thought of, in a previous life, I have tried with a friend to make a couple motion pictures. And I have no idea that this was what happened with Following. Christopher Nolan is a genius. He probably wasn't in anywhere near this situation. But what the situation that we found ourselves in a couple times, and I've talked to other people who try making movies, and this is a problem that happens a lot, actually, is you get done with filming and you get into editing and you realize you don't have the coverage, or you're missing a lot of what you need. And there's no way, you put everything you could into the initial shoot. There's no way to do reshoots. And again, not that that's what the situation was Nolan was in with following, but the non-chronological order and that aggressiveness with the cuts, being willing to fuck with the timeline that often, that would be a brilliant way of salvaging a movie like that. And you could do it with a lot of different genres, so for him to just think of that approach, even if he didn't need to, is really clever for a low budget filmmaker.
He's no dummy.
No, I think that's well established. Do we have anything else to add to following?
Give it a watch. I bet it's going to be in his top 12 for me.
Yeah, it'll definitely be in the top 12.
I can say right now it will be number 11 for me.
So that was part one of our two-part opening salvo of Nolan. We are pairing this with Oppenheimer, which will be next week's episode, but we are actually going to be recording it right after we're done here.
If you want to look behind the curtain.
Or we recorded it before. I don't know. There may be 3 parallel timelines. We don't know.
Maybe we'll have to cross-cut the following review with the Oppenheimer review and then let the audience sort it out afterwards.
I have a galaxy brain idea for the Batman trilogy that we'll talk about then. But
I was originally going to bite my tongue during the podcast, and then we just re-edited it based off of how thick-tongued I sounded throughout it. But anyhow,
I mean, your wife is a dentist. Can't she just give you a shot of something in the
yeah.
Not that she has it lying around the house, I hope. Just a laughing gas.
Yeah. We have you've seen no, you haven't seen our bedroom. Never mind. We'd like to thank Weird AI for our theme song.
Thanks, Ryan.
And
yes, you're welcome.
Of course, you can follow us on all the social medias, including, I don't know, B&E, Frame, Doodlebug. You can follow us on Ing, and then all the normal stuff.
Thank you guys thanks you for anybody listening, because you are technically a follower. So brought it all together, following. Let's go work on Zapruder Neuter a little bit, and then we'll get on Oppenheimer. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
You know what that makes us together? Together, that makes us flash gorgeous.
Flash gorgeous.
I'm not talking at you. I'm talking to you.
Flash gorgeous.
I don't want to hear about you. I want to hear from you.
It's 10-4.
10-4, buddies. Destroy. Kill all hippies.
I don't hate it. I just don't know why you strayed from the formula.
You bastards. You don't know it, Bob. I'm an artist. And I must reflect that in my writing.
That's cinema, baby.